I think this is an amazing film and really interesting. I think it's politically bullshit.
Oh, yes, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power.
So this is part of that conversation of like the imagined American working class that we've been doing for decades now.
These are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, put in a dance number. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence.
It's 5 fucking stars. It's absolutely unbelievably beautiful and amazing. And it is total propaganda for the Cuban Revolution. I don't think anymore that you can avoid fighting inside and outside of the state at the same time. I think there may be multiple ways to do that. I don't think electoral politics is the only way to do that.
Yeah, but some shit's got to get burned down too, so...
Right.
Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that the Watermelon Woman was a threat to like white, hetero, cis Christian culture.
I know we're saying that this isn't technically like a good movie, but a movie with surprisingly good elements and a really fucked up package.
This ending, you have good characters that are entirely powerless against the unstoppable evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Only after Avengers did Marvel movies start doing as well as Ghost.
Right.
Starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and some very phallic clay.
Did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope.
And I think it has the politics of cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks. Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, and in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're continuing our Black History Month coverage, in a sense, by once again taking a look at some forgotten auteurs of Black cinema. In this case, it's actually not for directing. But we're looking at Claudine from 1974, and we're looking at this basically for the work of James Earl Jones and Dinah Carroll. This is an interesting movie. I mean, I think you can call this Black auteur cinema because of the people behind, not just directors, right? Not just the director, but the role of at least one of the lead actors in shaping the context for the movie's creation, and then also just both their performances and their sort of their plays and things. And we sort of came to this one. It's a movie I've wanted to watch for a while, and also I'd really, really wanted to watch some James Earl Jones roles where he's actually like a lead. Honestly,
yeah.
I mean, I just keep watching him in. He's either the voice of Darth Vader, or he's the voice of Mufasa, or he's
Conan movie you like,
or that Conan movie I like, where he's basically a hippie cult leader from the Stone Age,
which he does impeccably well. I'm not a big fan of that movie. We see our previous episode on that one. It's a very interesting movie, but when he shows up, you're like, oh, this guy commands my attention. What a cult leader!
Yeah, well, yeah. He's actually, there's a reason I want to watch him in a leading role, because I want to see somebody who's that good get a chance to actually play all the ranges.
Yeah.
And see what that looks like. I mean, obviously, his voice acting obviously involves a lot of different emotions and things, and he's fantastic, but I want to watch him do this. But also just the background of this movie is kind of perfect for this podcast, because this is a profoundly political film that is actually, I think, integrated at a multiple levels with existing social movements at the time, and in contradictory ways, in ways that people have critiqued, but also, reflect a very particular time in the late 60s and early 70s, which, frankly, in retrospect, feels kind of hopeful, as difficult as it was, right? I mean, the part of it is, this is a movie, the rare movie, to show a Black single mother on welfare as a dignified, intelligent, resourceful figure. And this is one of the most consequential images and imaginaries in American politics. It is the tip of the spear, I feel like, in terms of how Reagan, attacked the American state's capacity to actually help poor people. And then, with welfare reform in the 90s, consummated by Bill Clinton, it continued to be the a powerful political tool to dismantle systems that benefited in certain ways. I mean, we could see their profound limitations and the ways that they're actually designed to discipline and control poor people, but nonetheless had benefited a multiracial poor and working class. But the image of them and the way they're understood and disproportionately were of Black single women. So like part of it is it's the power of race to. Anyway, we'll talk more about this. Sorry, I can't help it. There's so much going on with this.
No, there really is. I mean, that's after the setting of the film, you get the shitty right wing, welfare queen image in political discourse. Here you get like real people.
Yes,
which I find really fast. But yeah, we'll get there. So this is also set in contemporary time period from when it's made, which is 1974. Like it's not set in the 60s. It's not set in the future. Like it's contemporary story set in 1974, comes out in 1974. We also have Welcome Home, Brother Charles, which was also 74, was it?
I believe so. Yeah,
we just did. And then we also looked at The Spook Who Sat by the Door from 1972. So we're kind of deliberately surveying, looking at Auteurs this February, March, deliberately surveying non-blaxploitation films being made.
Which frustratingly, when you look around writing, not the professional writing, I haven't run into it, but I've still run into like comments and things where somebody literally refers to this, and I saw it somewhere else, as a blaxploitation movie, it is not.
No.
And I think it is a form of racism in itself, right? You cannot imagine a movie from this period involving Black people. And it's dealing with the same places that blaxploitation movies would be, but it's a completely different type of movie, but it cannot be imagined as anything else but that.
Yeah, even if it's not like overt, it's clearly like there's only one definition for you as a reviewer of 1970s Black cinema. And no, I'm with you. I've seen it on descriptions for all three of the movies we watched in this particular series. And it's particularly infuriating. I would have said before watching this one for Welcome Home, Brother Charles, because Jama Fanaka was on record as like, no, I'm not making a blaxploitation movie here. But it's even more infuriating here because there's not even any of the tropes you would imagine, except for maybe the soundtrack, which we'll mention in a minute. But let's do our quick synopsis. If you have not seen Claudine from 1974, directed by John Barry, I found like the Criterion edition I just found on YouTube. So it was streaming, or it came out in a Criterion edition at some point in the last few years. It's free on YouTube. I didn't check. Where did you watch it, Isaac? Is it streaming on Criterion Channel? Should be.
Wow, I should have actually checked there because it probably would have been higher quality. No, I just watched it on YouTube.
Well, on YouTube also, if it doesn't start with the Criterion logo, there's a couple uploads that are in the wrong aspect ratio. So you're missing chunks of the movie. I don't know if that was from a TV feed or what, but sorry, I'm done geeking out about the tech side of it. But yeah, it's on there. You grab it from Criterion. I think the disc is available for physical media. But as you mentioned, we have Claudine. It's her story. It's the title character for the movie. She's a single mother in New York City who is enduring an exhausting commute to the suburbs where she works as a maid for a wealthy white family, or kind of like middle class-ish, I guess, white family in the suburbs.
I think they're wealthy because they're talking about business deals in Germany.
Okay, that's pretty wealthy then. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, she is on welfare within New York City, but then heads to this commute in the suburbs off the books as a maid for this family. It's very carefully tended to, white community. She meets Roop, and he's a charismatic, but you could say somewhat irresponsible garbage collector. He's the garbage collector in the suburbs here, also from the city, but heading to the suburbs for work. And their romance quickly ensues. Claudine doubts their relationship is good for her 6 children, and Roop, short for Rupert, despite his good nature, he's a little reluctant to take on, fatherhood, I guess as we would call it, or another swing at fatherhood, because he also has 4 kids of his own.
Well, and we'll get into this, but all of this is deeply, all of this is deeply shaped by both sort of racial and class dynamics of this.
But it's not a narrative the way that Spook Who Sat by the Door had a very specific narrative that we went through kind of in order because it was building to something.
Right.
Welcome Home, Brother Charles, to a certain extent too, was like as we mentioned in a previous episode, that was more of like a 3-act structure where, Act 1 is the world and the imprisonment and like it's structured for a reason. This one, we're kind of going to be flowing in and out between the narrative threads as their relationship progresses, because there's certain aspects we want to highlight. So we're going to be a little more all over the place talking about it. But obviously, as we mentioned in every episode, spoilers ahead if you want to be this movie to just unfold. And it's a very much a underseen, if not a forgotten kind of movie. If you want the pleasure of just discovering it as it unfolds in its own narrative, please go watch the movie first, because we will be talking it through. And I don't know if a spoiler is the right word, because it's not like there's a twist ending at the end and somebody was dead the whole time or anything like that. But there is a pleasure to just sort of like watching these two performances evolve and their back and forth and the give and take and how they navigate the pratfalls that they're particularly their relationship, but any relationship's going to end up going through with these two types of characters. I did want to mention, though, because we always kind of mention here and there the synopsis that are on IMDb or Letterboxd. The tagline, I thought, couldn't be more 1974. The tagline for this movie when it came out was a heart and soul comedy. Can you dig it?
I also really don't like it.
I don't like it either. It doesn't fit this movie, I don't think at all. But James Earl Jones's character, Roop, he does say, can you dig and dig it quite a bit. So maybe it does kind of fit. I don't know.
No, because part of it is, I mean, it is funny and it's intentionally so. And I guess you can call it a comedy, but it's more of like a relationship drama. And so I feel like that's, it's just marketing designed to sucker people into something that it isn't.
Right. That's a good point too. See previous comments we just made about blaxploitation and marketing films that aren't that. Where I guess we should jump in. Something we mentioned at the end of the last episode based on the career of John Barry, the director here. Before this movie even goes into production, before he gets the role as director, I wanted to mention a couple of things, this long ripple effect of the Hollywood blacklist.
Right.
Because it actually has ensnared somebody else somewhat connected to this film that I had no idea about. We knew the story of John Barry. We'd mentioned him on the end of the previous episode. What was the film noir we both seen? Now I forget the title. He Ran All Night.
He ran all the way.
Ran All the Way. Fantastic. John Garfield, gone too soon. Man, that guy could have had quite a career. Also plagued by the blacklist, I believe. But so John Barry, he left because he was part of the Hollywood 10. Found out in doing some research for this episode, Isaac, I know there's certain directors we don't speak of and we're never going to watch their films because they named names.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Dmytryk was originally one of the Hollywood 10, I believe part of the Hollywood 10. He went into exile a little bit, but then in order to get back in Hollywood's good graces, he started naming names. He's the one who named John Barry.
Mm.
John Barry joined the Communist Party during the Spanish Civil War, and instead of naming names or doing whatever, he's like, fuck this noise, I'm out of here. And so he went to Paris for a while, to Europe. So he has a directing career outside of Hollywood, which is kind of an interesting way to go. I know there was like the Dalton Trumbos, went south to Mexico and were doing, screenwriting for hire for friends of theirs under different names. But Barry was like, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm going to Europe and I'm making movies.
And Jules Dassin went to Paris as well.
That's true. Yes. The previous 2-part episode on Uptight. If anyone's familiar with the Robert De Niro movie that I think is decent, not great, but could have been awesome, Guilty by Suspicion from 1991, that's a vaguely disguised version of John Barry's story going through the blacklist. The other person I found out was James Earl Jones's dad, Robert Earl Jones. He was, quote unquote, involved with leftist groups and experienced some blacklisting himself, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Oh,
now,
wow.
This wasn't a dad for James Earl Jones that was like around his whole life. I think he left the family when James Earl Jones was younger, but in going through some of the bio stuff, I was like, get the fuck out of here. That the ripple effects, and someday we'll figure out how to cover this as an episode or as a series, but like the blacklist just keeps popping up, specifically in the 70s, because as I mentioned earlier, Dalton Trumbo comes back, Ringlarder Jr. comes back. There are folks that are being brought back into productions as we get farther away from the studio system, and especially once we hit Spartacus, I would say, but MASH and the new Hollywood folks come in. They're bringing in these screenwriters that they adore because they're like, okay, well, this is ridiculous. We're not doing this blacklist thing anymore. We're getting these people back, and they start writing some of the most celebrated and amazing films of the era once they're back in. So John Barry's back in, and he's the director here. He's brought in through Third World Cinema, which is the group that is putting together Claudine, which I think is an interesting conversation to have before we jump into the film, Isaac, because we were just discussing the LA Rebellion with Jama Fanaka on the last episode. And I think this is an interesting sort of East Coast, New York, I don't know, not like version of it, but like simpatico production company.
So I'm gonna cite my sources up front. So I've looked at Justin Gomer's White Balance: How Hollywood Shaped the Colorblind Ideology and Undermined the Civil Rights Movement, and I've also been looking at Danielle Amir Jackson's article on Claudine as well to sort of understand the politics of this and the filmmaking of it a little bit more.
Is that the article over on Criterion?
It's over on Criterion. Yeah, can we post those? I guess.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes for folks.
So, I mean, part of it is, I mean, what Gomer identifies them as, I think this makes a lot of sense, especially watching this, is not so much a version of the LA Rebellion as an alternative approach. Is sort of it is an alternative, as in a certain sense, is an attempt to integrate Hollywood. Right. This is, a relatively realistic romantic drama that you could have seen out of Hollywood in the 70s, not now, really, frankly. But in the 70s about white people, but this is about a black experience instead, which is different from the sort of experimental fuck Hollywood of the LA Rebellion. And
Well,
I think
I think there's a little bit of that sentiment there because it's one of the co-founders is Ozzie Davis
right.
of Third World Cinema, and he has a quote about how what he was doing was he wanted to remove himself. His quote: "Remove himself from the Hollywood plantation."
So we should just say oh, sorry.
No, as I'm saying, I think it's a reaction to Hollywood and the limitations that he's feeling within Hollywood.
So we should just, all right. So Third World Cinema is a project that's started in I think 1969, involving Ozzie Davis, Rita Moreno, James Earl Jones, Brock Peters, who I mainly know from Star Trek, actually, Dinah Sands, Godfrey Cambridge, Perry Thomas, John O'Keelan, and Hannah Weinstein. And it's a lot of what it's an attempt. I mean, the choice of Third World Cinema is, in the political language of the time, identifying, I guess, Puerto Ricans disagree, but like black people as almost a third world nation within the United States. So it's relating directly to sort of like to sort of radical black politics of the time. And it's part of the big project they're doing is actually trying to get to integrate the Hollywood unions.
Yeah,
is a lot of what they're trying to do.
Their first dictate or their first mission statement was to train. It says to train blacks and other minorities to work within the film industry. So it's a training ground. The way that you've got, technically speaking, for film school kids in the LA Rebellion area at UCLA. Yeah. Well, this isn't affiliated with a school, but we'll give you the skills you need in order to get it, like you said, so you can integrate within the unions and the guilds within Hollywood and get gigs. So,
I mean, this is, in a certain sense, you can say less radical, but maybe not. Depends on how you view it. But this is an attempt to transform Hollywood, I think, more. I mean, Gomer sort of argues this, and I agree. I think it makes sense from what I'm looking at, like stylistically, but also just like what they're actually doing. This is, yeah, he attacks the plantation directly, like Ozzie Davis, but like in a certain sense, this is an attempt to push to create space, to carve out space, and to fight your way in from the inside. And in the style of this movie, yeah, this is not this could be an independent movie, but it is definitely not an experimental movie.
No, not at all. And I think, again, keep the context in mind. We are in an era, from Hollywood's perspective, of financially successful blaxploitation movies. You've got Shaft already 71. You got Superfly 72. I just checked. They founded Third World Cinema Corporation in 1972. So it could be an idea of like, okay, there's a window of opportunity here.
Right.
These stories are selling. There is some marketability here. Let's kick the door open all the way and get in.
And try to do something else, right?
Right, because their second part of their mission statement was to make feature films from a minority perspective, which is very LA Rebellion feeling to me.
Right.
So,
but to do it in just in a very different way.
Right. Well, and like we said in the previous episode with Welcome, My Brother Charles, Jama Fanaka was also one of the founding members of the was like the Black Committee within the Directors Guild of America. So he is trying to like work within the system there as well too, because it's Hollywood.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, so I mean, part of it is this is a movie which is created as part of a political project.
Yeah.
And I think it reflects that in interesting ways. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So there's more we want to say about the background of this, because it's so here they are. They're getting a blacklisted director.
Yeah.
He's a white director in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Is I think an interesting choice. I was a little surprised is what they went for. I mean, I don't think it. I think part of it is there's a lot of, like the lead is also one of the people behind the production company, right? So it
Yeah.
gets into that sort of complicated space of what is black film, because it's not just about the director.
Well, then, true. But then also I was thinking, so like Ossie Davis is one of the co-founders of this company, 1972. He directs Cotton Comes to Harlem in 1970. Like he's a director of films, of feature films, and successful ones in 1972. I don't have an answer to this, but I just thought, I was like, why are we seeing Ossie Davis's, directing credit here?
Well, I think part of it is, this is a director with experience of doing these sorts of stories in general. They probably thought he was the best person for the role,
right?
And he's a formerly blacklisted director. I can't, I'm sure there's documentation about this, but that is not an accident.
No, I don't think so either. So yeah, like I said, like there's a lot of blacklisted folks coming back into the fold here within Hollywood, but I think, at least from my perspective, when I go to watch this movie, I looked up and read about the career trajectory of Dinah Carroll and James Earl Jones, because I wanted that in my head going into this film. Like, I don't want like we said, I don't want the image of like the Conan cult leader in my head. Like, I want to know where were they at in their careers when they said, yeah, we're going to do Claudine and we're filming Claudine, and you get these two powerhouse actors just like, they're you could tell they're feeding off each other, even when it's like a little bit more heated or loving. Like you can just tell, like, man, like the craft and talent here on display is spectacular as far as two lead actors that just hold the whole thing together. Carol, well, they both have the same kind of basic general resume, like TV, stage, film. I don't know if James Earl Jones may not have done some TV at this point in time. Carol had already won a Golden Globe Award for her starring role in Julia, a TV show from 68 to early 70s. I haven't seen any episodes of that, but she's the lead actress there. I knew her more from Carmen Jones, Porgy and Bess, and you've seen Paris Blues. I haven't, but she's got a significant role in Paris Blues.
She's so good in that.
Yeah. First Black woman to win a Tony Award on the stage in 1962. And she would get a Golden Globe and an Oscar nom for Claudine. James Earl Jones, at this point, remember in his career, theater, he'd done a shitload of Shakespeare. I wasn't even worried about typing all the titles in because he'd done them all. Great White Hope won the Tony Award in 69 for that on Broadway. I did find, and I had never heard this before, he was in part of the pilot for Sesame Street. They filmed a bunch of these different skits and scenes, and then they were kind of like testing them, showing them to like educators and kids. And, whatever part he had, was like, wow, this tested really great. It was part of, like, he's credited as like, this got Sesame Street off the ground. He obviously, I don't know if he was ever on it or not, but he was involved in the pilot for Sesame. So from like Shakespeare, Great White Hope off Broadway, or, on Broadway, Tony Award winner, then he's going to do some Sesame Street. Then he's doing Dr. Strangelove, small part in Dr. Strangelove, Great White Hope, the film, which is an Oscar nomination. Then he plays The Man in 1972, a couple years earlier.
Which is a movie I really want to do sometime.
Yeah. So he ends up being like the first Black president. That's an interesting political film from the 70s we will definitely have to take a look at. Won a Drama Desk Award. Just celebrated stage and film actor at this point in his career.
So I would say like the Sesame Street thing is actually in keeping with this film, right? Because Sesame Street is very much a reaction to the movements of the period, to the rebellions of the late 60s or the mid to late 60s and into the 70s. Like it is, it's a political project in its own sense, which is sort of has some kinship with this one. Its target audience, was children in general, but specifically I think Black children in poor Black children. So like this is, it fits very well.
Yeah.
As along with being kind of incongruous. But hey, who doesn't? He seems to work well with kids in this movie.
Here, so here I found in my notes here. It's in 1969. It wasn't the pilot. Sorry, it was. They made some test films for Sesame Street. There were shorts. So he was in some of these shorts that were shown to groups of children to gauge the effectiveness of what would become the Sesame Street format. The greatest impact was one segment where a test audience was one showing a bald-headed Jones counting slowly to 10.
Interesting.
Awesome. But no, I when I saw that in the notes, and I'm glad I had that in my head watching this movie, because as soon as I start watching this movie, the opening sequence of the movie, you got Carol and her whole family walking down the street, and I was like, oh my god, this could be the block that Sesame Street shot on.
Yep.
The visual was like, whoa, okay, that's very striking, and I never would have been hitting play on this movie without some context, going like, yeah, this looks like the street from Sesame Street. It wouldn't have even been in my head. And I was like, wow, that's really kind of fantastic. I also want to mention too, because I don't think it's going to come up necessarily during the film conversation, but I mentioned the soundtrack earlier. There is a model, and I think it's in the documentary, Is This Black Enough for You? They mentioned that the blaxploitation genre was somewhat instrumental in popularizing the soundtrack at the time on vinyl of like putting popular music in your movie, or getting popular artists, as we already mentioned with, Shaft and Isaac Hayes, or in the case of Superfly of Curtis Mayfield, they're making hit soundtracks to the films. Often would either come out in advance of the film, because if you have a hit soundtrack, people are going to be pretty hyped for your movie. So there was this whole kind of popularization of people owning the soundtracks with popular music on it, not just like an orchestra score or something like that, which is totally fine and awesome. But that's what they did with this one. They got Curtis Mayfield. He came in and wrote and produced this entire soundtrack, with the performers being Gladys Knight and the Pips. 1974, that's a recipe for a hit record.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we should bring it up a little more in our talking about the movie, because I think this is a soundtrack that very much fits. Honestly, part of what I like about it is a soundtrack that very much fits a movie about, like, I'm not going to say middle age, because they're my age, and I don't think they actually are middle aged, but they're not young, right? Like, they're people. This is a movie about seasoned people who have lived their lives and doing things, and I think it's a soundtrack that really, I think it's I have a lot of, I'm not surprised Curtis Mayfield knows what he's doing, but it's like, it's a soundtrack that very much fits, right? It is not a soundtrack for, well, let's say a blaxploitation movie, right?
Right.
It's a soundtrack there's a certain restraint to it, almost. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit. I would say there's also the quality of, since these are original songs for the movie, the Pips, they start singing, you're like, wow, that's really the themes of because it's written for this fucking movie. Like, it's
right.
It really highlights it.
There's that moment where you're like, oh, they're really talking about Claudine right here. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Because they wrote this movie about her.
Right.
They wrote the song about her. So, yeah. So where do you want to start now, Isaac? Do you want to start with some of the political themes, dive into, the whole thing is opens itself up to a complete critique, analysis, observation of the welfare system as it existed in 1974. Should we just start with that?
Yeah, let's do that. I think there's a quote I want to open with, and then a quote from the movie. Well, actually, let's do the scene from the movie. So part of what's going on is that the welfare system, as it's designed, is a trap, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is designed to discipline poor women, and it is designed, the image of the welfare queen is very clear from this movie and before, and of course the Moynihan report in the 60s, and is not one that Reagan just pulled out of whole cloth, but starts with sort of with the the New Deal institutions and Great Society institution, welfare institutions in a certain sense, because it's very clear the image of the poor Black woman with lots of kids is an empowered tool, and is shaped to discipline them. So you can't get a job, or else your welfare is in danger. You can't get a man unless your welfare is in danger. If you do, you have to jump through this many hoops, and so forth. And part of what I just wanted to say is that this movie is one that almost directly echoes the social movements of the period. And so, I'm thinking of things like the National Welfare Rights Organization, which is an organization that was, I believe, mainly made up of African-American women, which, was successful in making the system more amenable in the mid-70s, right? Before the politics shifted fully to sort of neoliberal attacks on the state, which neoliberalism actually isn't actually an attack on the state, but is reshaping the state. So instead of welfare systems, you get prison systems, and the welfare systems we'll get into this. But, at this point, what you're dealing with is one that is designed to provide benefits, but to punish you for having them. And this is an organization that actually basically existed until 1979. So I want to play a clip from the movie,
Okay.
and then read a quote from one of the leaders of the NWRO.
And let's see if there's any overlap or any similarities between the two.
There might be.
I got you thinking again. Hey, baby. We got this real sweet thing going on. It can go on forever like this, as far as I'm concerned. So don't look so down.
I'm not down. I don't know. It's just things, you know. Charles doesn't want to go back to school. Paul wants to quit school. I'm here with you. I should be home with them. I'm home with them. I want to be here with you. I don't know. The kids are beginning to think I'm crazy. You come in and bingo, I go out.
You're just a great woman. That's all. You just putting out for him all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm putting out. You're right. You got that right. I'm always putting out. You know, I really don't want the kids to know, but I'm tired. Honey, come on. I want you to run me home, please.
Damn. It's like calling a married woman.
Yes, so you got that right. Because I am married. I'm married to the welfare man. That's my husband. Makes me beg for them pennies. Starvation money. If I can't feed my kids, that's child neglect. Go out and get myself a little job on the side. I don't tell him. Then I'm cheating. If I stay at home, then I'm lazy. You can't win. Mr. Welfare, that is the nosiest husband in the world. Oof. Mr. Welfare. If anything, divorce that bastard.
You divorce and then your bread stops. Then where are you?
Where am I now?
All right. So now there's a book quote.
I've been reading a book called "Abolish the Family: A Manifesto for Care and Liberation" by Sophie Lewis, who's a communist writer on what the family is and so forth. That's my opinions on that are neither here nor there in terms of this. But there was just a quote in this book about the end by Joni Tillman, who was a leader in the NWRO in Ms. Magazine, that just sort of got me a little bit. And I was thinking when I was watching this movie, welfare, she explained, is the most prejudiced institution in this country, even more than marriage, which it tries to imitate. AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, says if there's an able-bodied man around, then you can't be on welfare. If the kids are going to eat and the man can't get a job, then he's got to go. Welfare is like a super sexist marriage. You trade in a man for the man. But you can't divorce him if he treats you bad. He can divorce you, of course, cut you off anytime he wants. But in that case, he keeps the kids, not you. The man runs everything. In an ordinary marriage, sex is supposed to be for your husband. A little editorial there. That is a clear attack on marriage as a framework there, right? Because I doubt her position is that sex should not be for women. On AFDC, you're not supposed to have any sex at all. You give up control of your own body. It's a condition of aid. You may even have to agree to get your tubes tied so you can never have more children, just to avoid being cut off of welfare. Now, the system that they're encountering in this movie is a little bit different. And obviously, I think it may have changed because of this movement to a certain degree. But think about these two quotes.
It's almost dialogue from the movie.
It's almost dialogue from the movie. I cannot imagine that as an accident.
It's at least the sentiment.
It's the analogy of the welfare system as a husband.
Yeah.
They both have that. And it is both about how it is its disciplining function in sort of in punishing for you for being poor, in punishing you for being a black woman. To a certain degree, I mean, I think, obviously everybody on these systems were punished for it, but the image and the tool that was made to make it the way it was the image of the black women.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and in its function of mimicking, and of mimicking the sort of normative, patriarchal family, right?
Yeah.
At the same time that, you are both dependent on it, and it's right there. It's not an accident. It's clear this is the line of thinking. Yeah.
I want to play another quote then too. Let's see how this plays into it, because you hadn't shared that quote with me till we were recording, the one from the book.
Yeah.
So I pulled a quote so at some point, again, we're jumping around here. So, hopefully you've seen the movies, you know what we're talking about. There's a point where Roop and Claudine go to the welfare office because they have the intention of, well, let's get married now. Like,
Right.
you actually, let's say you're lucky enough to find some romantic love, and you find somebody that you're compatible with, that would be, a great partner for you, and you want to make it work. Now you're going to invite the state in to do the official, we're going to be married paperwork and all this stuff. So this is them visiting the welfare office, seeing what it's like for a woman, in this case Claudine, 6 kids, already on welfare. What happens then when Roop is brought into the picture through the the state documentation of being married,
Right.
and what that's going to bring into their lives.
Now, you understand that if you get married, we might drop Mrs. Price from the program, but this will be determined after your financial status has been computed by us. It has nothing to do with aid to the children. You understand?
Now, if you will sign the statement, it shows your income and your expenses, Mr. Marshall, and get it back to me within 2 weeks. You understand?
Yes, I understand all that, but listen, I gotta ask you something because I gotta think about this thing. What happens if I lose my job?
If you're married, you must apply for welfare.
I must apply for welfare?
You must apply for welfare. Otherwise, this would constitute a misuse of ADC funds.
Which is fraud.
You understand? If the husband's unwilling or unable to make a contribution equal to what it would cost him to maintain an independent living arrangement, he must apply for welfare. Do you understand? Otherwise, this would constitute a misuse of ADC funds.
Which is fraud.
Which is misappropriation.
Which is fraud.
Right, okay, now wait a minute.
You understand? This is fraud.
I mean,
it's almost satire.
Oh no! So this is the thing. This scene, if anybody thinks it's a social realist movie, it's tonally walking certain lines, and we're going to get into that. But like, this scene is satire. I bet you it sounds almost just like it is, or it was, but like it is absolutely satire. And they walk out of they storm out just saying this is fraud, pointing at the whole office,
like comically, yeah.
But
he even gets Claudine to like kind of join in like his big public, this is fraud.
I mean, it just illustrates the profound connection between the way that sort of state apparatuses are so involved in sort of disciplining and controlling people's bodies, but also disciplining and control the importance of the family structure, like the normative family structure, like the way we understand it, like is just what a family is, and capitalism, right? And how you're supposed to relate to labor markets, and how you're supposed to be punished for daring to sink below, which of course, for Black people in the labor market, it is much harder to rise higher, certainly in the period this movie is going on, certainly today, because of both historic discrimination and ongoing. So like, it's really, it's in that sense a very damning critique. At the same time, I think the politics, the image that they're doing, part of, it's hard to not talk about the content of the film, but part of the image that they're doing is they're giving, this is, a Black mother as a powerful, resourceful person who is, she's, because it's a movie about people a little older who know who they are, she knows who she is. She may have questions, she may have difficulties, but she, you watch her in that house with 6 kids, absolute chaos, but she's also like constantly on the move. This is a political statement in itself, right? To show this image. And so that's a particular sort of, I think, gendered argument. And then Roop, I think, this is the point where, so for instance, in Danielle Amir Jackson's article, she feels like there's a little bit of it edges on the edge of stereotype with the degree of Roop sort of being ready to run away. Because basically with Rube, he has other kids in other places, and he's been sending money, but now he's being targeted by child welfare basic, or because he hasn't been paying enough. But then he doesn't have enough money to be the breadwinner, right?
Right.
For Claudine's family. And so like this is the crux of his dilemma as he sort of breaks down. And so this is the masculine breadwinner image, right? That and single breadwinner, which is something in the early 70s people would imagine would be possible, maybe still. But was never, necessarily normative for Black families, and to the degree that it was for middle class white ones specifically, historically. But like basically, he's driven. He's driven to despair by, I think, sort of the horns of a masculine, sort of patriarchal, understanding of what it means to be a father, right? Which means breadwinner. He's able to do the relating to the kids. He's able to sort of do the care work, but also with experience as a man to handle, like, especially the boys and their relationship.
It's almost exclusively that kind of interaction. Like he buys them all ice cream at one point, but there's even you only get like one scene where he's with one of the younger sons who, like, he asks him, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's commentary there. Then he ends up seeing this kid out on the streets where he's throwing dice one day. And then after the game's done, he asks the kid, like, well, how did it go for you? And the kid recounts just like chapter and verse, like, I did this bet, then I did this bet, then I went down here, then I went up here, then I went back down here. And he's like, dude, you just did math. You just did multiplication, addition, subtraction, like, I don't want to hear any more of this, like, you're not good at school. Like, this stuff. Like, and it's a great little, like, kind of role model scene.
Well, part of it is, so this is the second youngest son who's not going to school. So he goes there intentionally to this game. And part of it is he wins it, right? He ends the game. He must be, I think the implication is part of it is,
Roop does.
Yeah, Roop does. So Roop is street smart, right? And so he knows how to cheat, frankly, probably he just rolls nothing but sevens. Like, and he is smiling, and it's James. And
he has a routine. You see him like line up the dice. He does a certain, like, this number good. He's like, he knows what he's doing.
Ends the game, takes the kid. But part of it is what he's done is he showed his credibility, right? He showed this kid, I know what I'm doing, right? Yeah. Like, I know what you're doing and what you want to get into. I know this world that you want to be in. You need to get out of it.
Yeah. Stay in school, you do know what you're doing. Well, yeah, it's like, it's a great little like role model moment, because it's like potentially it's setting it up as like he gave the kid the confidence. Like, no, you do know this stuff. Go back, pay attention. You know math,
right? Well, yeah, no, exactly. Like, look at what you can do here. And he points out like the things that he wants to be, pimps or pushers or whatever. In the long run, they end up old and poor, right? Because there's nothing left.
Yeah, it's not a way out.
And then with the older son, it's interesting. So the older son is angrier. And he's a teenager, but he's an older teenager, I think. He's 18. Yeah, he's 18. And part of what's interesting is that he leaves the house, and he's got a pretty patriarchal attitude toward his mom. And there's a lot going on there. But he leaves the house and goes and joins sort of an activist group. And what you think in a blaxploitation movie, this would be this would be some armed guerrilla group or something. But instead, it's an organization. It looks like a collective. We can talk about the last scene of the movie, but a group fighting to reform the welfare system. Mm-hmm. So it's literally, the movement, sort of at a more patriarchal mold, frankly, or like his attitude toward it, than like an organizations when actually run by mothers. But nonetheless, he's directly involved in the movement that affects his life, and that the movie is sort of being inspired by.
Well, and it's also, and I didn't catch this when I was watching, but I listened through the audio when I was pulling out clips, and I really didn't realize how much this son, it's Charles is the oldest son. He really has some serious anger towards his mother that I didn't pick up until I was only listening to the audio. There's a resentment of like even his brothers and sisters, because they're not all, like, it's not 6 different men, but it's not all the same father.
Right.
And he has some resentment about that as well. So like he has made this his central form of teenage, I guess, rebellion to a certain extent. But this is what is defining him right now, to the point where we get to the end of the movie and he has made some pretty drastic decisions on his own.
Well, part of it is she tries to keep them, I don't want to say respectable. I mean, I think that is part of it, but on the straight and narrow and safe.
The moral center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And safe.
Yeah.
So part of it is he's doing activist stuff, which is great, actually. And I love seeing this stuff. This is the inception of this podcast, talking about what is in film and what isn't. I mean, obviously, this is a political movie. This isn't a coincidence, but just having this as just a thing that would happen is just not something you would see today.
It's not even like as a subplot. It's like a subplot because it's an ensemble piece starring two main characters with some sprinkled in scenes of the children here and there. So like it's like a C plot.
Oh, but part of what's interesting about this is how Roop handles that, because she's trying to find her son. Roop basically does sort of a hypermasculine play when people are saying no, but basically like, look, he plays both on his blackness, right? To say like, I have a right to be here.
Yeah.
And then also I am a, 200 and something pound garbage collector who will punch you. Tell this mother where her child is.
Right.
But part of it is when they actually get in the room, he's looking around. He doesn't make a political comment, but he gets what's going on here. And he says, and he just takes her out, right? Like, we're not going to have this argument with him.
Yeah.
And I think he's both gets maybe that that Charles isn't going to leave, but he's not going to say in front of Charles, but like, he's closer maybe in view to the activist work that Charles is doing.
Because Charles seemed ready for a confrontation there.
Right.
And Roop's like, no, I mean, he doesn't say no. He just, like you said, he's silent and he walks Claudine out.
Yeah.
Like, found him. He's here. He's doing whatever. But then I found this interesting, how do we set this up? There's a parallel story in this C plot with the children where you have Charlene, who's the oldest daughter, and Charles, who's the oldest son. And within this context of the, like the welfare structure and what future they may be in store for both of them, because he's 18, she's probably close, but she's under 18 because Charles is the oldest. Claudine's very worried because Charlene, her oldest daughter, is dating someone. She's very worried.
She's dating
about.
Yeah, sorry. She's dating like a teenager who's getting into sort of black nationalist stuff and has changed his name to Abdullah.
Yep. Very, very, very shades of Bill Duke from Car Wash for me. I know that's a couple years later.
It's the same name.
Yeah.
I mean, she's both the politics of this. I mean, she's rolling her eyes.
Well, then Charlene though also like comes home drunk one day and she's like, "Yeah, my boyfriend Abdullah, he was teaching me how to hold my liquor, or whatever." I mean, that's clearly like a mom excuse for her mom or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But by the end of the movie, she is pregnant.
Yeah.
Which is, Claudine's worst fear. And as awesome as Carol is in this role, like the tonal shifts that she manages within this character, she beats her daughter with a hairbrush. Like she's on the bed and she's hitting her with this hairbrush. And then like in the next moment she turns, because it's like, it is her mother. She's the mother. It is her daughter. She's hugging her. And she's like, she sees maybe what's laid out for Charlene, the life that Claudine has. And she was like, I was trying to maybe keep you away from this or whatever. So complicated mother-daughter relationship going on there. The thing that tags on with that, though, also is that Charles, by the end of the movie, has had a vasectomy.
Yeah.
So you have two different genders here and two different children from Claudine having two different reactions to, or maybe even commentary on what Claudine's role is within the movie, too. Again, like, mother of 6 children, on welfare, doing the side gig in the suburbs in order to make ends meet, in order to provide for the family and try to create, like I said, she's the moral center for this family.
Part of it is, so we're sort of moving away from the politics organically, but we can get back into it. I mean, all of it's political, but part of it is I think this may be one of my favorite movies in portraying parenthood, because the balances that Diane Carroll is pulling off here, I mean, exactly what you're talking about, the tenderness, the authority, the flow between them. There's this great scene after the drink, after she's like helped her daughter throw up in the toilet,
Oh yeah.
pulls her together, and she's sleeping in bed with mom tonight. Right. And then some of the other kids come and they
one more comes in, and another one.
And it is so tender and beautiful in the way that she part of it is that she's talked about the welfare system as this trap. I think one of the things that's amazing, I mean, in the clip that we did before, is the way that she's allowed to say that she's tired. She's allowed to talk about how exhausting parenting is, how good it is to have something for herself, and at the same time how much of her identity and how much of who she is this, right, this mission. It's the first time they get together and she comes over and there's this whole thing, and you're a parent, right? I'm not a parent, where she literally can't turn her brain off, and she's been having this problem. And in the first scene of the movie, the women on the bus who she's with are saying, you need to get laid. Like, this is your
just straight up.
Yeah, they openly say this.
Quote I wrote down, she was like, "You're deficient in vitamin F."
It's amazing. It's so good.
So I was like, oh, okay, nice.
But like part of it is, it's she can't turn her brain off. It's not just about parenting. It's not just about that. But part of it is she's in this mode, right? This is her mission. I just think the performance is absolutely stunning.
Well, it is directly about parenting, because like you picture, like, work is shitty. She's a maid out in the suburbs. There's a gigantic bus ride involved to and from, the whims of public transportation in a giant city like New York, and then doing the thankless job of running a house, like all the she's doing all the grunt work at a house, and then she gets home and it's you can't turn your brain off, because you get home and you walk into a circus. She walks in and she's immediately juggling like all the personalities and all the whims and all the needs and all the stuff. Like one kid, she gets home and he's of course put like bread and cheese together and threw it in the toaster because he's fucking 6, Meanwhile, you have like your 18-year-old, son who just kind of like more or less like hates the rest of the kids, because he's just like, I want to get the fuck out of here. You got your daughter who you're worried about being pregnant, who's dating Abdullah, and who knows where she's going to be heading off to tonight or sneaking out again. And you can't shut your brain off, because you can't. Like because she is like a caring mom who's trying to be present, trying to be there for all the kids, in a wild range of capacities, from 18 all the way down to probably like 6, maybe 8. I mean, there's a huge age gap, and needs of all these different kids that you've got as well.
Oh, it's immense. Gosh,
I did pull a clip. I wanted to, because the contrast I thought was interesting between the daughters. So you've got Charlene, who I didn't pull that clip because it's kind of a lot of screaming, and like I said, she's hitting her with a brush when she finds out she's pregnant, but then it ends up with them she's consoling her. They're curled up, like hugging her in bed. So there isn't really audio to grab of that, but I did grab the audio of when Charles, he's laid up, her oldest son, he's laid up at home in bed because he has had a vasectomy and she doesn't know that yet.
Charles, you think you are so cool. Had yourself fixed, right? So you would never give no woman a baby. You did it to yourself. Gonna make a revolution. That's what Mr. Whitey does to the black man. He cuts off his manhood. But you did it to yourself, just like Rupert's doing to himself.
Oh, he's doing what?
He's giving up, throwing it in. Life is over, forgetting it.
Man, look, he was bad news. You're much better off without him.
Don't you never tell me when I'm better off. Don't you never tell me that. You did it to yourself, but don't you never tell me when I lose something that's goddamn special that I'm better off.
I only meant that.
I don't give a shit what you meant.
Very different parental reactions, but also Charles is really kind of poking at her in a way that her daughter is not verbally.
Well, he's more grown up, and he does. I mean, both of them do childcare, but he's been the adult childcare, and he is like, getting a vasectomy, so I'm never causing my situation. Is like, it is extremely pointed. I mean, he's using sort of black nationalist understandings of sort of like the endless sort of plantation, right? The direct trajectory to slavery, and what, it would be better off if I did not exist, right? But, I might as well die fighting. But like,
doesn't he even say at some point in the movie, like, I wish you wouldn't have had me, or why didn't you just abort me? Or he has some parallel to like, he says something about plantation, like you would have just like drown your kid or like kill your kid in infanticide, just because like, so they won't have to deal with this.
Right. No, he's directly arguing these things in frustration.
But I like how the movie doesn't condemn anybody's point of view. Like it treats it all very valid, because like that's how he feels.
This is the thing, is this movie. It's, I think, one of the things that I love about it. I think one of the great things about it is that everybody's decisions Well, it's a 70s movie. It's a 70s movie. So that means that people can do things that you might say, oh, that's not good or that's not. But the movie is not there to judge them. And in this case, because it's an image of populations which in popular political understandings and popular culture are condemned in multiple ways, it's demystifying them by making them real people and not condemning them. And even when they do things that might fit into the stereotypes, changing that stereotype because you have a full human being in front of you and you understand. Right. Part of it is the welfare, having the welfare set up this way. You have deep understanding of the institutions of basically of structural racism and capitalism that are not separable, that shape your choices, including Roop. I mean, I was mentioning this before, the breadwinner image. He runs for it because he can't be a breadwinner, because structurally he can't be a breadwinner.
That version of manhood he sees coming if they're married, based on that visit to the welfare offices and what that would all mean, and sees the financial burden of like, well, I already have these other 4 kids and 13 years, 13 years he mentions as a garbage man, like just the same thing. There's no advancement going on. There's no better job. Like he's got this and that's about it. And on his own, it's like, he's got maybe a little spending money here and there on occasion, but
he's got a car.
Yeah.
He can, he has the clothes that he wants.
Right.
But his building is maybe not the best one because there's mice, but
there's a bunch of sex workers there too. Well, like he's like, yeah, there's some ladies in the evening or whatever he calls them in 70s terms.
But they which is there's nothing wrong with that. They seem like very nice neighbors.
Doesn't even say like a higher class of cockroach or something. Like he makes it like he's very lighthearted about the whole thing too. He's not like a downer kind of character at all.
Well, we should talk about what James Earl Jones is doing in this role. I mean, we were talking about what Diane Carroll has been doing, but like. Part of it is Charles. It is the older son who, when he runs away, goes and finds him. I mean, he basically had warned his up front.
Sorry. When Roop runs away.
When Roop runs away. I mean, one of the discussions Roop has when he first gets into the relationship with his buddy is dating a woman. The dangers. They're talking about the dangers of dating a woman with an older son, because you get into a fight with her, you're getting into a fight with him too. And that's and the older son basically says when they first, it's like, if you hurt her, there will be blood.
Yeah, I'm drawing blood.
And so
he's like, you owe me a pint of blood or something.
So, he's drunk in a bar where there's also people trying to get people to testify.
Yeah, that was a little confusing, but
I bet you it's a 70s New York thing in Harlem.
Come on.
But basically the son comes in and beats him up and convinces him to go back and get married. So this is, I guess, my final political point here is, so this is a movie that ultimately goes with, the normative family form in a sense, but also subverts what that's supposed to be by saying, no, you don't need to be a breadwinner. You need to be a responsible, caring figure in people's lives.
Part of it.
That is part of it.
Yeah.
And there's both
like part of the unit. Like you're not.
No.
Isn't like you to control and provide. Like just join up.
Yeah. You're not going to be the patriarchal father figure from which everything flows.
Right.
But you are going to be a caregiver giving what you have to give. Right. And so it both undermines that image and also plays into sort of a more normative image of what the family should be at the same time.
Well, especially the final image where it's like joyful music and they're all walking down the street together, arm in arm. Like, couldn't be more just like smile on your face, time for credits.
I mean, it's.
But underneath that, like you're saying.
Well, also, let's talk about this final scene.
The wedding scene where they all get arrested?
Yes. So part of it, you have a parallel. They're trying to get married. Charles is supposed to be, giving her away. But Charles is at a welfare rights protest, which is where we finally see what he's actually arguing about. It's jobs over welfare. Yeah. And we should talk about what the political results of that discourse are in the neoliberal moment. But like, basically, they end up being chased by the cops. He's running for it. He runs back to the wedding, partially to do his job in the wedding and also to dodge. The cops show up, Roop does what he does, which is defend Charles from the cops by pushing them over. Both of them get arrested. Then Claudine just like, fuck it, gets in the paddy wagon, and all the other kids get in the paddy wagon, and they ride off.
You're going to arrest one of us. We're all going with you.
Right. And then they're seen in the street happily bailed out, I guess.
It's so weird because like they're all hauled away, paddy wagon, door open on the back too, by the way, just like flying down the street, and then hard cut immediately to just like upbeat music, walking down the street all together now.
So I think this is a good segue into like the technicals of this movie, right?
Well, hold on. Did you want to do the jobs over welfare kind of?
So part of what's interesting, part of what, this is a moment where this is an effort to make this welfare system less patriarchal and less racist and less designed to punish working class and poor people.
Mm-hmm.
In the 60s and 70s. It is a moment where a lot of people may be in despair at these systems, but in retrospect feels like a moment of hope because you actually expect to advance and expand these systems and make them better. What ends up happening...
That's a good point.
Taking the discourses that help to discipline welfare receiving mothers during the period of sort of, you can call it embedded liberalism, you can call it Keynesianism, you can call it the welfare state, you can call it the New Deal consensus or whatever, but the period before neoliberalism, that starts in the 30s and ends with Reagan, really, but is already starting to end in the 70s. The counterattack, right? The counter-revolution to this, the anti-state rhetoric that we see from the right. But of course, part of it, like I was saying earlier in the podcast, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, the great abolitionist geographer, would point out, it's not actually getting rid of the state, it's reshaping it into what it is. And this is also the point where, the prison system, always class and racially unequal, explodes, right? This is where the prison industrial complex that we understand. That is the solution to the crisis of the 70s. They go on, while the image of the welfare queen becomes a key attacking point, and you can see the language that they're using, jobs over welfare or so forth, can be totally repurposed for the right in a context in which the institutions like welfare are not serving the dominant sort of bloc's interest, but are being attacked by it, if that makes sense. So like basically once you have Reagan in there, where you don't have politicians who are wanting to use this to discipline people anymore. Well, they're using the welfare system to discipline people, but instead of making it hard for you to get a job, they're forcing you to get a job that will be shit.
Right.
They're disciplining you as a worker. And so it's a very, and welfare reform in the 90s, right, under Clinton, which I mentioned before. Like, so it's a different approach, right? But in both cases, welfare is designed to control and discipline. But yeah, this is, to me, I read this as almost like a hopeful moment where you think you can do this because the next 40 years are going to be shit. And you're not going to be reforming the systems to make them more equitable. You're going to be lucky if they exist at all.
No, I think that's key context for going into watching this film. Although, ideally, if you've listened this far, you have already seen it. So maybe you don't have this context going into it because it's not something I've researched or read that much about. So that's good context to place you in the moment of 1974 when this is happening, where like I'm thinking of it with modern eyes, like,
right.
Yeah. So, but like you said, it's not that it wasn't this like amazing, rosy, everything's really helping out kind of thing here. But the idea that like, oh, this could actually be a better system. And we have sort of a structure in place where like, oh, but if we just reform this a little bit, this could actually be helpful.
Yeah. This could be something different.
Right. Fixable, I guess, or I'm not sure I'm using the right word there.
So, which fits, in some ways with the approach toward Hollywood of the makers of the film at a certain level. So I wanted to talk about James Earl Jones in this movie.
Okay.
Or I wanted to ask you, both of them, I think they have very good chemistry. And part of I Got What I Wanted is like the way he plays this so lightly, I think, but also he's so heavy, right? Like he's such a powerful presence on screen, right? As a Shakespearean actor, as whatever. And, his voice, which is famous. but he's the playfulness that he's able to bring out while doing that.
Oh yeah, like he's smiling through most of this movie.
He's smiling, his movements, his use of language. I mean, everything. It's just his line delivery is so joyful and interesting, and I find it to be immersive. Right? Like I
Yeah.
know I'm watching James Earl Jones. I always do, but also I'm watching a really immersive role. Right? Like I'm watching a very
Yeah.
I don't know. It's great.
Lived in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's not an actor who can like physically transform. Like he's not going to do I'm trying to think of an equivalent for like the way in the 70s De Niro like slimmed down to like almost anorexic levels for like Taxi Driver or something, or put on weight for Raging Bull by the end of the 70s. It's still clearly James Earl Jones here, but with the way he does his line delivery, the way that he just even like slumps his posture a couple times, where you're just like, he looks different when he's drunk at the bar and Charles comes to get him versus when he's like hanging out with his buddies. Or even the scene we mentioned earlier where Claudine, the clip we played where Claudine was talking about being married to the welfare man. It's such a 70s style of acting and delivery, specifically on film, though. I don't know too much about 70s theater. James Earl Jones, like it's also like a post-sex scene where she's like sitting in a chair and he's laying in bed. He's got coffee and like a little saucer. He's mumbling. Like you're like, wait, what did he say? That I guess, it's kind of Robert Altman credited sort of thing where like you have overlapping dialogue. It's the way people do talk. Sometimes you step on what somebody else is saying. Sometimes you create an awkward moment. Sometimes you mumble a little bit. The other person like, I got the gist or whatever. You're not going to, oh, I'm sorry. What did you say? And it's not worried about everything being clear. Is kind of interesting in this. And like I said, when I was pulling clips, listening to just the audio of this, because you can just listen to the audio and there is great music interspersed, like we mentioned, to highlight the mood and set the tone of the film. But I was really just like catching so much more performance just listening to it, which hopefully that works because this is an audio medium and we played a few clips, that you really realize like these are trained stage performers, which I think is really essential to why these performances are so great and so lived in, is because they're coming through a time, some of the limited theater I do know of the time period, like they're coming through a time when you have like method, like the method is around and you're really, you do a lot of rehearsals and you get inside the head of the characters and you really think about motivation and you're trying to be the character. I don't know if specifically that James Earl Jones is like a method actor per se. I don't know too much about his preparation or his approach to acting, but it feels like it's there. Like you don't just become like the level of Shakespearean actor that he was at this particular point in time and continued to be. I mean, he was even doing like some Shakespeare readings when Obama was president, invited him to do performances at the White House. It's in his blood at this point. Like it's his DNA. Caroline, I don't know her career quite as well, but what I've seen of hers, it's always just captivating, that like effortless charm that some people just have when they show up on screen. Like, wait, I'm following that. What are they doing? I want to see this. I want to see more of this. Like, and to see them both in like completely like front and center lead roles was spectacular. I have no quabbles at all, like performance wise or whatever. I think the only hesitations I have with the film, I think, are the direction.
Okay.
Which I've only seen a few of John Barry's films, but did you have other James Earl Jones observations? I mean, this is what you were seeking out, and you said you got it. So,
well, no, I mean, I think I think I kind of said it. It was exactly what I wanted to see. Is him,
yeah,
him being a full rounded character, and he's really good at it.
I mean, it's a glib answer, but like we got to see James Earl Jones have sex in a movie. Like he has a romantic relationship, and it's a fully formed character, and Dinah Carroll's there too, obviously. Like that's their relationship, but a romantic lead.
Yeah, he gets to be a romantic lead. Well, I mean, he gets to be a romantic lead against someone. I mean, basically, you've got two people who. I mean, I love the chemistry in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I love how
right
well
from the get-go too. Even like he's the garbage man on the route where she works, and it's not exactly like the first meet cute, but like they're aware of each other. They've seen each other before.
Yeah, they've been talking.
Yeah.
But like this is where they pushed over, and I mean, I've already said it, but I love this as a movie about people who have lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's sort of what I got for this. I love it.
And I think from a romantic drama or romantic comedy perspective, I think because this is 74, I mean, it's like 4 or 5 years out, but something like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner
Mm.
is officially a romantic comedy, a romantic drama. Sidney Poitier goes home to meet the parents, whatever. It's a sexless role.
Yeah.
It feels like it's living in an era that like we're not in that era anymore.
Yes.
So and as good as that performance is in that movie overall, I have other different problems with. The performances aren't one of the problems in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. It's more that like the way it was put together to be like this perfect, shining, flawless example of a human being, that the only reason the parents could have a problem with him in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is because he's black. Everything else, like on the resume on paper, is fine. This one, you have flawed and interesting characters, like you said, who have lived life and have experiences and have made good decisions. They made bad decisions. They fight. They also make up and are loving in like the same 2-minute scene. And it feels very, you're like, yeah, this is how people interact. Sometimes tensions flare up. Then somebody says something that pisses you off even more, and then somebody else calms you down, and then you realize like, oh, this actually might work.
Right.
It has a very real lived in feel to it.
Yeah.
Which is, like I said, so part of my critique of the movie, and I'm not saying at all like that I hate it or I dislike it, is the production style for this movie.
Okay. All right, bring it.
So this is some speculation in my interpretation here, but we've watched a lot of stuff. Quick plugs, we haven't done it in an episode or two for our summer of 60s episodes. If you go back a couple summers ago, we went chronologically through the 60s. So I think we're pretty well situated as a podcast and as two people's collective memories of specifically American film, 60s through the 70s. We're pretty well versed here. I think what we've got in this particular case, John Barry comes in, and I think you have a classically trained studio director, right? I mean, that's where he was before the blacklist hit and he went into exile. And I think he's still directing from a classic Hollywood style for this movie, to the point where my first few notes were like, it felt like a TV production. The interiors are all perfectly lit. They look different to me. Okay, so here, interior scenes versus exterior scenes in this movie. There's a different feel to them because you're shooting on location. You're in the streets. Picture the apartment where Claudine and all the kids live in. It's well choreographed. I have no problems with that. But the way that it's shot, it feels like a sitcom to me, because you've got maybe a 2-camera setup, maybe even not, shoots into the living room, into the kitchen. And then at times it does shoot out of the kitchen into the living room and you see the window out into the street, but only like 2 times in the whole movie.
It is true that it generally comes from the position of coming in the door, but it does move around some.
A little bit, but mostly through editing.
So yeah, you don't have any like pans going through it.
Right. So what I need again in this time period, I needed more. I would love to have seen, especially the way that it's mixing like the social realism with also like the comedy that also can ensue too, but also the theme. So like we said, it's not doing like a neorealism thing the way that some of the LA Rebellion, like, Charles Burnett or Fanaka, well, not necessarily Fanaka too much, but like some of the LA Rebellion that was really into like Burnett doing Killer Sheep or Several Friends or something, where he's going for a neorealism kind of aesthetic, a lot of handheld camera work, that sort of thing. I think what I would have really preferred for this particular story and these performances specifically is more of a Cassavetes approach, like a John Cassavetes doing Woman Under the Influence, handheld, like maybe it's a long take to go through Claudine returning home that first time when we see the chaos of her house, and it's one long take, maybe going through the entire house. So it doesn't feel like a set to me. It feels like a lived in crazy, like living environment when they're hiding all of the extra things they're not supposed to have, like the certain type of iron or a coffee pot or the toaster oven from the welfare lady who's visiting. That frantic nature, I think, and maybe like a longer take kind of choreographed within the space would have worked better for me than it felt like we were back in sitcom territory. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm gonna sort of, part of it is, so I don't totally feel the same way. I see what you mean. I don't think it looked like a sitcom to me. It did. The set design looked very lived in, actually. I like the set design of both houses, actually, of his apartment and her apartment. I really like the set design of his.
Great. I think it's the filming style.
And I guess the filming style didn't really take me out because it's still more dynamic than like a sitcom one overall. But what it added to me was the degree to which, and this is actually what I liked about it, is, so this is social realism, but it is walking so many tonal lines, right? And it can fall into tropes. It can fall into racist tropes, to be clear, right? If you're not careful. And it can, I mean, the ending is almost a sitcom ending. That's the thing, is like it 100% is. And I think that's, once again, very intentional. Like they know that's what they're doing.
It's the right tone for that scene though, too. Even the opening scene, it seemed like the opening credits of a sitcom.
Right. So I think in that sense, it feels less than that, than more of a little closer to classic Hollywood directing, but not quite. It's still 70s. So less a sitcom and more of that. And I think that works for me for this story, because it seems to me they're trying to make a story that can be a mainstream Hollywood movie, except it's telling a story from a perspective that you just won't see. Not totally dumbing itself down. I think you can read other analyses of it that, there's plenty of critiques of the politics of the film.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think for me, it actually fits the story and it fits what they're doing very well.
And to be clear, I'm not saying it ruins it or makes it a bad movie at all. I think it's still a great movie. It's one of those that I think was really eating away at me, because I was like, ooh, this could be like mwah. For me, from my perspective. It's the aesthetic I would prefer to have seen for the story that it's telling.
Yeah, I would also like, it does, when it's in the street, it does really interesting stuff. I mean, there's a scene where two of the kids are riding to Roop's apartment to see if he's left town.
Oh, in between all the cars with the one kid on the handlebars?
Yes.
Yeah. That was kinetic. That was very different.
It's really different. So I do notice that, and when there's that much of a differential between one approach within the movie and another, I can see that sort of bothering. I mean, also it's like parental nightmare stuff. Like, it's like, oh my God.
Oh no, I was gripping my chest, like, oh, they're gonna get hit by a car. Oh my God, he almost fell off the bike. Like it was, which I think is what it's meant to do.
It's meant to create tension
at
multiple. Well, it's a great scene because they've created tension at multiple levels.
Yeah.
The tension, that basically what's happened is that she's having a Father's Day party for Roop, which is sort of like opening up that they're going to get married and everything. Yeah. And he doesn't show up and he runs for it. And so they're riding over to do this. So you've got the tension there. You've got the tension at his apartment, realizing he's not there. You've got all these different layers. It's a really great scene. I don't totally agree with you, but I see what you're saying. And it is true, maybe at a different, a more dynamic approach in some ways. But I like even how their scenes are shot, right? Their scenes together.
Yeah.
So, but I see what you mean about like within the house, like it's very, like there's a setness to it when you realize they're shooting mainly from one direction or from like two. But like I'm
not meaning even like sitcom, like in tone, like, oh, it's a situational comedy, it's hilarious. More just like a television production aesthetic, because like there's spectacular TV movies through the 70s, 60s, and 70s actually. But yeah, again, it's a tiny quibble. It's not in any way like it takes the film down a notch. I was just like, ooh, this could have just a couple of tweaks and it would have hit me like right out of my chair, kind of like wow. Well, we have to ask the question, Isaac, as we're wrapping up here.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a leftist film?
Oh man. Yeah, actually, kind of.
I think so.
I think so, from a particular part of what you could call the broader left in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think so. It's not, you'd have to dig into the history of sort of Black movements in this period in all of their diversity and complexity, right? To sort of pick out somebody, frankly, with more expertise than us, to tease out everything that they're doing here. And where these people are come from, but I think we can kind of figure it out. But I think broadly speaking, yeah, it is. And I think in that it's a really it's from a time where those sort of perspectives could filter in more effectively.
Yeah, I think so too. Sweet. Well, that does wrap up our look at some Black auteur cinema that we tend to take a look at. A lot of like underseen and discoveries the last couple of years. Do you have any favorites we did 3 this year? We did Spook Who Sat by the Door, Welcome Home, Brother Charles, and Claudine. I get the feeling you're going to say Claudine as much as you were enjoying this one.
This is the one that made me feel the most. They had me totally in there. I was
Yeah.
I was thrilling it with their relationship. I was like pausing it for a moment because I'm bad with these things. I get real. I don't watch romance. I don't watch as much romance because I don't like it. It's because it's hard.
There's too many feels.
There's too many feels, and
Yeah.
I admit it.
No,
I
I
have a
get
little trouble. So like I think it. I mean, it's just these two central performances are just hard to beat. But the truth is, I think we did three really fucking good movies.
I think so too. These are definitely the best performances, I think, of everything.
Yeah. Well, yes. I don't think there's even a lot of competition there, frankly.
No.
I mean, Spook by Spook That's Out by the Door is well performed. Brother Charles is fairly amateurish, which is not a critique of it. In fact, it should be for what it is, right?
Oh no, yeah, that's my pick of the three, just because like I like the scrappy nature and the whole backstory, and I'm just completely enamored with Jama Fanaka, and I'm going to slowly dole out the rest of his filmography to myself over the next few years.
What can I say? I just like glossy Hollywood productions. You know? I mean, that's my thing.
But we are moving on. We have picked out another theme for ourselves as we head into the spring months, as it were. What do we got in front of us, Isaac?
I think we're going to try this. You know, I just realized something. Our entire year is programmed at this point.
It's getting that way, isn't it?
I think we are. I think we probably should think about shaking things up a little bit.
Yeah.
But
we're not doing. Well, no, this is new programming. We haven't done this before.
But this is new programming. We're doing Action April.
Yeah.
Now, this listeners may or may not have realized this if you listen through, but during the pandemic, I basically got myself through kung fu movies, and and DTV action. We have talked a little bit about that. So I am really excited to pick some with some interesting political things going on in them. And so what I think we're going to do, with your permission, a couple double features.
Permission?
Well, you know, double features are always a bigger, you know, it's a more of a production.
That's true. But
I think it's worth it for this. We're going to start with next episode. We're going to do two classics of Hong Kong action from the golden age of Hong Kong action in the 1980s. We're going to do Above the Law and In the Line of Duty 4. And I think there's interesting political things that can be said about both of these, and a lot of kicking.
No, this is fascinating because I also fell into a lot of kung fu comfort cinema that why did that just start? Why did they kick off with the pandemic? That's so weird. I went a bit more previous to this. I went more with kind of like Shaw Brothers era. Five Fingers of Death, 36 Chambers, that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to like filling in that continuum on my watch schedule with some of this 80s stuff. Do we need to have seen In the Line of Duty 1, 2, and 3 for 4 to work?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good to know.
I mean, to be totally frank, I don't quote me. The film gods may strike me down. I think technically is this a series that's sequeling to Yes, Madam? I'm not sure.
I've done no research on any of these yet, so to be determined.
Yeah, I did know this at one point, and this is not a perfectly choreographed podcast, as you may have figured out. We do prepare, but we're also sort of like doing things. But no, I mean, I think.
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. But it has got a very young Donnie Yen.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's in a direct line. I think the way they did this, Yes, Madam, and maybe Royal Warriors. These are both early Michelle Yeoh movies, and then Line of Duty starts with 3. All right, we'll know this by the time we do the episode, but it is
coming next time.
Yeah, no, because Cynthia Khan takes over as sort of a female lead, and then it's Donnie Yen, a very young Donnie Yen.
You'd have to be pretty young, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's early
20 maybe. This is the 80s, right?
Well, he's let's see, how old is Donnie Yen? Yeah, he must be around 20, because so like Donnie Yen's about 58.
Born in 63.
Yeah, he's born in 63. So he's in his early 20s here. And then we do have a lineup. Do you mind? Maybe I'll just say the second pair for the second episode.
I mean, you can, but the way we change our minds and rearrange stuff, who knows?
True. All right. Maybe it's just
Or
will
maybe a
remain a
tease
mystery.
as to what we may focus on in the second one. Since this is the Hong Kong one, I assume the second one's going to be the DTV focus.
Yeah, I do have an idea. I have a strong position on this.
Well, ever since we met, Isaac, I've always enjoyed the double features that you would either suggest or put together or discover just through conversations like, oh my God, those two do fit together perfectly. So I'm going to do my best to watch these back to back as a true double feature. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
will report back the effects on our next episode. But before we officially sign off for this episode, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you're enjoying the show, tell a friend or two. And if you love the show and feel so inclined and have the ability, feel free to visit our Patreon page we have set up. See the links in the show notes for also the articles Isaac had mentioned previously as well. And until next time, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Isaac. Look, we know that the state serves the interests of capital, but is also a battlefield between different complex interests within the right and center, and nowadays, a certain degree, a very weak social democratic left, for all we can say of that. And it's the material condensation of social relations between the ruled and ruling, and between different elements of the rulers. And hence, we can sort of say that that's, what remains of the welfare state is sort of the refracted the condensation, right, of the conflict, right, in the ways that it disciplines and in its incoherence. It is a result of social struggle. We can go beyond this, and we can create something better than this. You can call it socialism, you can call it communism, you can call it anarchism, but I think all of these things, we can create something better. We can call it various forms of abolition. But in the meantime, we have to live with these systems, and they can be punishing, painful, at the same time that we depend on them. So I just ask people to stay safe in their interactions with sort of the brutality of the neoliberal, but also pre-neoliberal, the New Deal welfare state. We can win, and we will win. And we will create something better. I think the hope that the movie that we watched here creates that. But yeah, in the meantime, stay safe when you're in those offices and dealing with those condescending bureaucrats. Yeah.